Danielle Smith was down in America because she was invited to the presidential inauguration, one of Canada's only politicians to be invited to the inauguration. The CBC's Adrian Arsenault tried to embarrass her, or at least bait her into saying something that would cause a lot of drama. Of course, Danielle Smith completely walked right over her. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name's Sterling. I'm your host. Danielle Smith was one of the only Canadian politicians invited to the inauguration of Donald Trump, and she was then when after going through the round, she was stayed down there for a few days to try to make some deals and to talk some things. All the while, the far left in Canada was losing their minds, trying to say that Donald Trump was something that he's not, and they were running around looking to cause a lot of hysteria and looking to cause a lot of drama, looking to detract from the fact that they have overspent and mismanaged and all of the things that have brought us to this location that we currently live in as Canadians was done by them and had nothing to do with Donald Trump. So Danielle Smith was prepared to stand her ground on her position, and the CBC tried very hard to embarrass her and was very insistent in asking questions that were baiting and leading. And of course, Danielle Smith, being sharp and capable and competent, saw right through that and walked all over them, put them right down into their place. Some of the things that she said, though, have now come true. And while the other premiers were running around acting like hysterical people, had they only listened to Danielle Smith, perhaps they could have been out in front of some of the problems instead of now being even further behind. Let's have a listen to some of the things that she had to say.
I've been making sure that we put the Canadian interest front and center, talking about how we have a wonderful mutual trade relationship that's mostly tariff-free, and I hope that we can keep it that way. And I was pleased to see with the speech today that clearly the president likes tariffs. He thinks that they're a policy solution, but he's given Canada a reprieve. We'll see how long that lasts for. But I think it's a demonstration that the president recognizes that it's a complicated and delicate relationship between Canada because there's so much cross-border flow of goods, and we have a real opportunity to show how the Americans benefit from that trade relationship. So if you take energy out of the picture, we actually buy more U.S. goods and services than they buy from us. So we actually are the ones with the deficit, and I think we can make that argument. I think we can also make an argument about how our discounted energy gets value added in the U.S. and then it gets exported internationally, and they benefit from that too. And so I think we can make the trade deficit argument. But what keeps coming up is that we're not meeting our NATO commitment. We're not meeting our defense spending. The Americans believe that we're free riding on the security that they provide, and they've made that point since Donald Trump was in office the first time. And so you've seen all of the premiers. We have repeatedly at our joint conferences asked for the federal government to take that 2% target seriously. And I think we have to if we're going to avoid any future trade actions. One of the things that does keep coming, the world's a dangerous place. You can see that. The first action he took today was to declare a state of emergency at the southern border. We certainly do not want to see the same kind of action taken at the northern border. We want to make sure that the Americans have confidence in our law enforcement, that we're stopping the illegal flow of drugs, people, human trafficking. And more importantly as well, we also see that the conversation around international security and how we can be a partner. When he talks about Panama and he talks about Greenland, he's demonstrating that he's concerned about the global threat that maybe China poses or maybe Russia poses, and he wants Canada to be a partner in that. So those are the reasons why I think those issues keep coming up.
Well, let's start by stating the obvious. That was probably the most diplomatic thing any Canadian politician said over the course of the last 2 weeks. Any politician that has the ability to make change. Anyway, I know Pierre Poilievre said something, but let's be straightforward. Pierre Poilievre doesn't hold any office currently. He holds positions in the Conservative Party, but because we can't get an election, we are left with this lame duck prime minister and this in tatters Liberal Party that just wants to distract and detract from the fact that they have destroyed this country and have ruined our chances for a future. So they're trying to run around and get you all fired up and look like there could be a problem with Donald Trump, when in reality, had they done the right thing in the first place, there wouldn't be this problem. Or if they even understood the way Donald Trump thinks, they wouldn't have to throw fits and tantrums. You don't see Danielle Smith doing that. I saw her say no different than anybody else, but she said it in a very diplomatic way. Since that point, though, Donald Trump has come out and said that he expects NATO countries to increase their spending to 5%. And let's be honest with you, how many people in this country say to themselves, we don't have to worry about China coming through the northern, invading through northern British Columbia because the Americans will come up and protect us. I mean, think about the fact that we say the Americans and not the British, right? Even though we're part of the British Commonwealth, we don't even think to ourselves that the Britons will come over, the King Charles will come and defend this nation. Now, of course, we have allowed the far left and their tenderness and their beta-ness to destroy the military culture in this country. We can't get them to do any procurement, but there is an opportunity for us to start to change that. There is an opportunity for us to say, hey, listen, let's start to become a stronger nation. Let's start to put the needs of our people ahead of the needs of a few people who are too sensitive to be put in charge. Weakness is not a leadership skill. So saying to the military that they have to be careful of their tone policing soldiers is just not going to work. They get filled with adrenaline, they're doing a tough job, and they don't want any kind of restraint on their personality that way. And of course, that's why your numbers are in the toilet. That's why you can't get people to join up. It's not because they're not patriotic, and it's not because they're afraid of hard work. It's because they don't want to be accused of something they didn't do because somebody else is too sensitive to understand that they're being unreasonable. Donald Trump has made a couple of very serious points. He wants NATO spending up and he wants security up along the border. Well, what's wrong with having security in this country? It's funny that the politicians in this country will say, oh, look, we have all the natural resources in the world, and yet we don't defend them. We're not prepared to defend them. There are countries out there right now that have like I say, standing armies that are larger than most of our army put together, and yet we have all of the resources. So do you think for one second they're not eyeing us and thinking to themselves, oh, look, if I could only get past the American military so that I could get my hands on that stuff? Instead of listening to the hysteria of the far left, of the corporate media, of Mark Carney and his ilk, perhaps we should be listening to the one voice of reason that's out in the only one standing alone, talking by herself, saying this is the way we should do it. The one person who was in the room with Donald Trump, by the way. So the one person who has had time to speak and interact with him, the one person who was talking to him to the point where she got an invite to the inauguration and no other politician did. So anything else is secondhand news, right? Don't worry, it didn't stop there. And the whole time, the CBC is desperately trying to bait her, right? And it's funny to watch how easily she dismissed them.
What I asked the president was, do you want to buy more oil and gas from Canada? And he said yes. And I think that that's a common ground to start from, because I know that what is happening there is the Americans see that global energy dominance is the way for them to not only provide a low cost of living for their own people, but also to be able to provide support for their friends and allies internationally so that they're not dependent on hostile partners. So what I would like to see is for us to have some projects on the table that we can propose. How can we build more pipelines to the U.S.? How can we build more pipelines to the east so that we can help our international partners? How can we build more pipelines to the west so that we can help our Asia-Pacific partners? If we want to be demonstrating that we want to be a partner with the Americans on energy security, I think that that's a good place to start from. Meet the Americans where they are, help to support their international goals. I think we can maintain that relationship.
I think it's important that she opened that by saying that she asked Donald Trump, that she spoke right to him directly. So I get that he's Donald Trump and he's got a lot of people around him in Secret Service, and it was a busy day and a busy week and all the rest of it. But she certainly would have had a few minutes to talk with him. And then she would have certainly had more than enough time to talk to the people that do have the ear, that do have his phone number, that do have the ability to get into the room with him and say, this is the situation here, there, and everywhere. I mean, don't think for one second he's not used to having a staff around him. Of course he is. And there are people that will know how to talk to him, and there are people that will know how to ask the questions that he's looking to be asked. That's how that stuff works. And Danielle Smith obviously is prepared to understand all of that as well. She went down there and asked him the question, do you want to buy more Canadian oil? And he said, absolutely, 100%. In the short term, however, he's going to need that. So even if we say that over the course of a year or 2 years, he's going to be slowly phasing out the Canadian contribution, we have to meet him halfway so that he doesn't do that, so that we can become the friend and ally that he is looking for. Why would we not do that? Why would we not want to have more money in our own pockets? Why would we tell ourselves that we're going to sacrifice every form of luxury and all of the security that comes along with money because people like Mark Carney see a way for himself to make a lot of money, gain accumulate a lot of power and put us at the hands, at the mercy of situations like this while he flies away into a new country on his private jet. Why would we do that? What's in it for us? Why is that something that Canadians think is a good idea? Why is that something that the corporations of this country think is a good idea for the rest of the population? Donald Trump is not talking that way. He's talking about what's best for the middle class. He's talking about what's best for the people on the ground, in the trenches, as they like to say. As so does Danielle Smith, and so does Pierre Poilievre. No one else, however, is talking that way. And if they are talking that way, they're only talking that way for the last 10 minutes because they think that they're going to be able to swing some votes. But for the last 10 years, they've been telling everybody that they have to own nothing and like it. Let's remember that. The Liberal Party is the own nothing and like it party. Well, I don't know about you, but I feel like that everywhere I turn in my life, when I see people with money, they're doing better than people without. And the way to do that is to have jobs and economy and all the rest of it.
I can tell you I would never go out publicly and say we should stop selling car parts as a way of making a point to the Americans and hurt Ontario. I'd never go out and say we should stop selling aluminum to Americans as a way to make a point to hurt Quebec. And it hurt me that they felt that they could make that same argument, that Alberta should sacrifice our interests in order to try to advance some kind of trade war. I take a different approach. Let's stop fighting with each other. Let's maybe try to remove some of the internal trade barriers. Maybe my fellow premiers can stop blocking pipelines when we propose them to either the West or East Coast. And maybe this should be a moment of reckoning for us as a country, that part of the reason all of us look north-south is for the years have made it very difficult to do business east-west. So maybe that's what we should be talking about, is each other, so collectively we can sell our products to the world, whether that's to America or whether it's off the West Coast or whether it's off the East Coast. And maybe that's a far more constructive conversation to have than how do you sacrifice one province's interests in order to be able to protect the rest. And fortunately, we don't have to have that conversation today.
What she said there was in response to Adrienne Arsenault's comment that MP LeBlanc had called Danielle Smith a bad Canadian because she wasn't getting hysterical and overreacting like all of the premiers at the meeting. Of course, we know that there were many premiers in that meeting that didn't agree with the policies that they were trying to put forward. And everybody knows that Doug Ford is being, he's not responding properly. There's a different video there. This one, though, the part that you couldn't hear, that was at source. There was no, in the recording, that just never showed up. But what I believe she said is that one of the biggest problems we had is that successive governments have not encouraged or nurtured inter-provincial trade. And I agree with her. One of the problems that we have right now is that all of the stuff that we want to sell, we just tell ourselves we're going to sell it to the Americans. And as a result of Donald Trump's decisions, him wanting to sell stuff to Americans that's made in America, we are now in a position where we're not able to sell anything to anybody. Everywhere we turn, we have development of interprovincial sales being blocked by the federal government and by consecutive leftist policies. That's something that we should be discussing. But of course, all of the leadership, except for Danielle Smith and Pierre Poilievre, are running around being hysterical and hoping to detract from the fact of their, from their horrible track record, from their being responsible for this pickle that we're currently in. And that is about to get very much worse, right? I mean, he hasn't even started yet, and he won't need tariffs when he gets done because we're not in a position to stop because we don't have a functioning government. We can't change the tax codes that are going to be required to counter. And you can't think for 1 second that Mark Carney, whose whole green initiative is collapsing down around him, is going to be completely at odds with the policies of Donald Trump. He's not going to be able to change the way that things. Half the reason that we're in this mess is because of the policies of Mark Carney. 3/4 of the reason. So Danielle Smith is being the only voice out there that currently has an elected office that is saying, no, you guys are handling this all incorrectly.
If the conversation comes down to a potential export tariff or a ban from Canada, from Ottawa, what's in your playbook?
Well, my playbook is to talk with the incoming Secretary of the Interior and the incoming Secretary of Energy and ask if they want to double our oil and gas production and double our oil and gas export. That's where I'm going next. I believe that we should be talking about how we sell more to America, not less, and that we should be talking to America about how we can buy more from them too. If they really are concerned that we're not buying enough, well then let's buy more gas turbines, let's buy more AI infrastructure, let's buy more military equipment. This is the constructive conversation that we need to have, and I think we need to stop with the threats and start talking about diplomacy and collaboration, because that's where we're going to find a solution.
I think that was well said. That was very diplomatic. It was very on point. I don't see anybody telling themselves that all of the upper crust in this country don't tell themselves that they're going to stop spending money. I don't see Mark Carney saying, you know what, rather than give money to the Americans, why don't you just take all of the money that I've earned in my life and you can have that to generate the economy? And making money is the way that we need to be. And that's exactly what she just said. I think we should be selling more to the Americans and not less. And what people are overlooking is one of the very first phone calls he made was to India. Because with the problem with China, what they have been doing is moving some of the manufacturing of the chipsets out of Taiwan and into India to keep the Chinese away from taking them by accident. Not all chipsets are created equal, and when you hear that America has sold like an F-16 to a country, they don't sell them the pimped out model, right? They give them different equipment inside, though the jet and everything looks the same. The stuff that's at the dashboard is different. They withhold different stuff. I don't know what it is all the time. Some of them are mounted with different missiles. Many of them have different computer sets, though. Many, many, many of them. That's one of the first things they do is they say that, no, you got to have this chipset. That's why you see so many movies with American movies where they blow up the equipment so that people can't get their hands on the chipsets and duplicate them. India, however, has a massive military manufacturing mechanism in place. Like they're making more guns. They're making almost as many guns as the Americans, and they're selling them to different markets. Canada, however, has a bad diplomatic situation with India. So here we are, the Americans saying to us that we don't have enough military, that we're not strong enough along our border. We have our own military saying that we're under 50% staffed. We can barely look after the east and west coast, never mind the one that we have with the Americans, and never mind the one that we have with Greenland and all the rest of it. It seems to me that Danielle Smith is right. We should be buying more guns off the Americans. We should buy whatever they're willing to sell us. And if we can't make it ourselves, we should buy it from them, at least in the short term. At least we can say to them in the middle, you know what, you're right. Here, have a few barrels of oil and a bunch of uranium. And in exchange, you can give us all of the Jeeps we've been needing for our units that's been like 15 years. And if you wouldn't mind, could you just lend us a couple of technicians to help us weld together a few of the battleships that you have, or an aircraft carrier or 3? Why not? I mean, that's what all of the other countries in the world are doing. Why would we not do that? Why would we not stand behind ourselves, like to stand in defense of ourselves? Why would we not want money in our pockets and security in our streets? I mean, isn't that what we're talking about? Isn't that one of his biggest grievances, that he feels that the Canadian country is trying to rely too heavily on the American military? Well, all the while we have people screaming that, America is bad, and then the first thing that they do when there's something that goes wrong, they're like, let's go see what the Americans have to say. I mean, I'm not telling you that I'm not certainly interested in joining the United States of America. Canada was founded by people who didn't want to be Americans. But don't go telling me that the rest of the world is going green and going peaceful, because they are not. As for now, I think it's time that we put people like Mark Carney on the shelf and just, get down to, let's make sure that we can start to have a standard of living that is worthy of all of the people that come here, what they're looking for. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have a stronger country. The problem, of course, is one of the first 2 or 3 things that he fired those people was the DEI. And I think Canada should absolutely start to fire all of the people that are in the DEI, because it is making the country weak and poor. And I don't see why even people who are benefiting from DEI want to be weak or poor. So let's just make the playing field level. Let's all stand behind the one flag, and we will together as a nation make ourselves stronger, make ourselves wealthier. And the elites that tell us we should own nothing and be happy can go try to sell that somewhere else. All right, I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.